Those on the Cunha side have held direct meetings with Manchester United already, but around the football project. And Cunha is sold on that.
The futures of Matheus Cunha and Liam Delap continue to steal the headlines ahead of a crucially important Europa League semi-final. We're detailing both, as well as summer plans for Rasmus Hojlund and Alejandro Garnacho, before diving into the club's latest Spanish challenge. All coming up on your Theatre of Red. A 96th minute Rasmus Hojlund equaliser salvaged a deserved point for Manchester United against Bournemouth on Sunday, with the Dane breaking an unwanted streak of games without a goal. Now, as we all know, the domestic battle has long faded, but Ruben Amorim is keen to attack each remaining fixture with intensity and a winning mentality. And this has all served as an appetizer for Thursday's Europa League trip to Spain, amidst a daily barrage of transfer reports regarding Matheus Cunha, Liam Delap, and some familiar faces at Sporting. Alongside me today to chat about football, potential incomings, and whatever else rears its head is my good buddy Ben Jacobs. How are you on this sunny afternoon, sir?
How you doing, Shaun? I'm very well. Looking forward to an incredible end to the season, really, where Tottenham, Man United, Chelsea all could be in European finals, and that race for Champions League as well is going to hot up, even though unfortunately Manchester United won't be in it.
Unfortunately, and as I discussed last week in the podcast, there's a certain sense of humour to the fact that Manchester United and Spurs could contend a European final, given the absolute trauma that both sets of supporters have undergone throughout this season. I began with a brief mention of Sunday's 1-1 draw at the Vitality, with a point cementing United in the dizzying heights of 14th in the Premier League. And the less said about that, the better. But despite another lapse of concentration, which inevitably led to Antoine Semenyo opening the scoring, Amorim was relatively pleased with his players' response and their control upon endless assault on the final third. Obviously, the task was made a little easier when the home side were reduced to 10. But this was a game that the travelling support will feel they should have won if the ongoing issues in the final third were not such a conundrum. Despite all, Rasmus Hojlund did find the net for his 4th league goal of the campaign, which was his 9th of this season. And not forgetting anything that has been and gone, that's inevitably going to do wonders for his confidence ahead of a trip to Bilbao. Now, with speculation growing about a possible loan deal to Serie A, many individuals at Carrington have advised me that they still believe in the ability and the potential of Hojlund, with a consensus that he was dealt a pretty rough hand when a failed deal for Harry Kane inevitably ended with no veteran strikers supporting him upon his arrival in the Northwest. Is that a view that you share about the youngster, and do you feel he has more to offer an improved attacking setup under Amorim in Manchester?
Yeah, you get the impression that Hojlund is a streaky player, so if given a run in the side, he can really get going, and he has had some injuries to contend with as well. And you're right that Manchester United wanted, in theory, Harry Kane, and it's all very well looking at the deal that eventually got done for Bayern, but the finances for Manchester United were very different, not just because of their PSR situation, but Daniel Levy's price and terms for Manchester United completely different to Bayern. So Manchester United had asked about Kane. They felt the deal wasn't feasible. They'd walked away. Then you look at Bayern getting it done and you think, on those terms, would Manchester United have tried? Yes. But would Daniel Levy have sold to a rival on the same financial terms? Probably not. So Manchester United moved on. And then, of course, we knew with Hojlund that Manchester United originally wanted to pay closer to 60, 65 million euros, and the final price is nearer 90. So he arrived at Manchester United with a high expectation and a massive price tag as well, and still hasn't really fully got going, but the potential is there. And now we have to wait and see this summer whether or not Manchester United are open to offers. And that will be informed by, one, who they bring in the number 9 position, and two, whether or not they feel that Hojlund ultimately is open to leaving so soon into his Manchester United tenure, because my understanding is the player wants to stay and fight for his place. And then 3, as importantly, very difficult to make a book profit on Hojlund because of the number paid. And therefore, it's likely that Manchester United won't sell permanently unless somebody puts down astronomical finances, which I don't see happening. So there's serious considerations around Hojlund about making a rash decision too early and maybe he can get going, about ensuring that if they are to part ways, there's no book loss. And in addition to that, as importantly, finding your new number 9 also to make sure that you don't lose a player in a position where Manchester United need goals before you're actually able to secure a replacement. And this is why I think Manchester United will take their time with Hojlund and Xerxes as well. And a determination on one or either will only be made after they know who that number 9 is going to be. And once that number 9 arrives, then I think we'll get a lot more clarity around the future of Rasmus Hojlund.
You know, you make a perfectly good point there, and I always find it amusing when I see it across social media. Individuals coming out and making statements such as, look, if we were offered 35 or 40 million pounds in the summer for Hojlund, you got to snap the club's hand off. But so many people forget about the book value. They forget about the inevitability that the club has to match incomings and outgoings, looking on that financial line across profit and sustainability. And it's not really feasible to think that a club is going to come in and allow United to clear any sort of debt, given the fact that Hojlund has had such troubles. One thing I am curious about, because generally speaking, the individuals that I divulge in conversation with about Hojlund are Manchester United supporters. You obviously on a neutral perspective, Ben. How do you view what you have seen at United in terms of his development? Do you see it as a lack of ability coupled with naivety, or would you weigh more on the fact of a lack of service, as is the regular conversation online?
Yeah, there's an element of service, although when Bruno Fernandes is playing, he's got that creativity and ability to unlock defences. I think from wide areas, there's been a lack of service. Garnacho, for me, incredible player, so capable of being explosive and dynamic, but not necessarily your old school wide attacker that just puts early balls into the box. And if you had a cam on Hojlund, the amount of times that he's kind of checking a run or wanting an earlier ball. And with many of the top teams who are technical, that's not always the style. You could make an argument that if he was playing in a team like Brighton with João, Pedro up front benefiting, the wider players there are more inclined to put an early delivery in when defences are not lined up, go a bit more direct. And Pedro's thrived off that. It's the same for Alexander Isak. The amount of balls in the box played in by Livramento, Hall, Trippier, Murphy, who's been fantastic in the last few games, but they're always early. And 30, 35 yards out, Newcastle are not afraid to feed Isak because they back him to score. Whereas at Manchester United, it's a bit more technical. It's about the versatile attackers getting lots of touches in and around the box. And my feeling with Hojlund is that he'd be better served in a direct system where he's the focal point. And it's the same for Xerxes, who we know can play all across the front line. He's dropping back. He's actually doing relatively well in the middle of the park, linking up play. But what you want from these players is their physicality, ability to win aerial duels, ability to get their head on the ball. All of that is the sort of bread and butter. And the irony is that when Man U have tried that under urgency, it's worked, such as chuck on Harry Maguire in games, and the amount of touches going route one to Maguire in the opposition box that he's won shows you that that can be a very beneficial approach. But then when it's not urgent and Manchester United are in control of games, or it's 0-0 with half an hour to go, they're far more methodical. They're trying to use the flair and creativity, not the directness, to unlock games. And I think Hojlund would benefit actually from that more urgent, that more route one approach, at least sometimes. So that's kind of quite interesting to see whether he can feed off that if they're a bit more versatile and mix up the play rather than always trying to go through the centre and use Garnacho to cut inside, use Bruno Fernandes as a metronome or in a more advanced position to give and go and burst into the box. I'd actually like to see more Manchester United just feed Hojlund, feed Xerxes, and see whether or not that makes a difference. Then I think if you look at the numbers, first of all, he was never a 20-goal-a-season player at Sturm Graz, at Atlanta, at Copenhagen. I think at Copenhagen, he left for Sturm Graz without even, to my knowledge anyway, scoring a league goal. Then when he was in the Austrian Bundesliga, it was like a goal every 2 games. At Atlanta, it was a goal every 3 games. And in his first season at Manchester United, he scored 6 more goals than in Serie A. So if you go from 2022 to 23 to 23 to 24, regardless of perhaps the inconsistency across 90 minutes and regardless of some missed chances, if you only take the goals, which a striker is judged on, there was a big improvement between Atlanta, 10 goals in all competitions, and I think 16 in all competitions last season for Manchester United. But now it feels like there's a slight step back, and this season it's 4 Premier League goals in 30-odd appearances. So Hojlund has to find the way somehow of not just being there or thereabouts in double figures, which he's managed to do in much of his career, but he has to get from that 10 number to closer to that 20 number. So the disappointment is probably that he's gone from 16 goals last season to 4 in the Premier League and 9 in all competitions this season. And to really show the improvement and the ability to bed in at Manchester United, he has to go from 16 last season to 20 plus this season. And obviously with so few games left, that's looking very unlikely to happen.
I do think it's also worthwhile mentioning and noting the fact that he has just turned 22 years of age. So he is still learning. And the point about Harry Maguire is a fantastic one, because so often I've seen that point when it is route 1 to Maguire. Hojlund is often on the bench at that stage. And you can't help but think he's got to be shaking his head thinking that he would absolutely love some of those balls drifted into him throughout the game, really utilising that sense of variety being a spice of life. And you mentioned Garnacho. Now, he is a man who continues to divide the supporter base with a mishmash of performances and a worrying lack of cutting edge in the final third. And the reason I say that, you've obviously stated he's not your typical type of wing player. And I think that buys into more so in the fact that wingers are really coming out of the game and you're more so looking at inside forwards being a crucial part of the attack, just like Mo Salah at Liverpool. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not ignoring a player who is an assist away from a double digits in goals and assists with 10 goals and 9 creations throughout the season. And furthermore, he doesn't turn 21 until July. And many do worry about the prospect of what he would achieve elsewhere. However, when you peel back his output, we do see an integral forward at Manchester United with 2 goals in his previous 22 Premier League outings. And in that time period, he's taken 81 shots and missed 13 big chances. Now, Napoli remains a viable option, given their continued interest in acquiring his services. And obviously, David Ornstein has recently confirmed that it is highly possible he leaves in the summer. Where do you stand on Garnacho, pure profit, and the allure of remodelling a forward line with a more clinical attacking option?
Yeah, I think Garnacho and an exit is possible. We've known about this now since the beginning of the year. Probably more so than Kobbie Mainoo. There's a bit more grandstanding with Mainoo, but my understanding is that Mainoo would like to stay at Manchester United and they want to extend him. So it's going to be a lot harder, I think, for clubs to get a deal done for Kobbie Mainoo. With Garnacho, like you say, pure profit may come into the thinking and an exit is certainly possible. I think Manchester United will bill an exit, should it happen, as a reluctant sale, but one for around the 75 million euros mark that they might sanction. And you have Napoli, who are also interested in Georgi Sudakov. And you have Chelsea, who are looking for a left-sided winger or attacker, less with Jadon Sancho in mind, even though they could return him to Manchester United for a 5 million penalty fee, and more because of the Mykhailo Mudryk situation and the fact that on that left side, it's likely that Raheem Sterling leaves Chelsea as well. So Garnacho's there for Chelsea. Nico Williams, even though it's a costly deal if you factor in the wages and the agent fees, and Jamie Gittins are the 3 names that I'm hearing for Chelsea. So there's at least 2 concrete suitors for Garnacho in Napoli and in Chelsea. And we have to wait and see now whether that deal gets done. What we have to remember, and why it's so reluctant on Manchester United's part if they decide to sanction a sale, is, as you said in your question, Garnacho is 20. And for a 20-year-old to have now back-to-back seasons of 10-plus goals in the Premier League, plus any assists, plus nearly 100 games in the Premier League, and nearly 150 games for Manchester United, all before he turns 21. That tells you that this is a experienced player. And when we talk about footballers, it's really easy to just look at the age and go, why are Chelsea buying young? Or why are Manchester United intent on buying younger players to lower the average age of their squad? But the reality is that age is a number and can be juxtaposed against the physical number of games, goals and assists for an attacker like Garnacho. And the reality is there's lots of players out there that are 24, 25, 26 that nobody would bat an eyelid at if they came on Manchester United's radar because they're, in inverted commas, established. And they've probably played less league games in a Big Five league than Garnacho at the age of 20. So the reluctance is down to the fact that he's not only played a lot of games and can constitute, therefore, an experienced player, but at 20, there's room for improvement. And any football manager will tell you it's much better to miss countless big chances than not have those big chances in the first place, because eventually you put those big chances away and 10 goals becomes 15 goals, becomes 20 goals. And you would expect Garnacho to still have improvement in the next 2 to 3 seasons. And Manchester United realise that he's not the finished product. And when I watch him, I feel like you have this dynamism and you have this explosivity. And it reminds me of Riyad Mahrez at my club, Leicester, who under Claudio Ranieri went over the right-hand side, got freedom to cut inside and play behind Jamie Vardy as well, and out of nowhere became incredible. Whereas in the previous 2 seasons, his talent was amazing, but his decision-making was poor. And with Garnacho, there's still a little bit of that where he receives the ball in a dangerous area, he does something brilliant to create space, or he cuts inside, and then the final ball or decision-making isn't ideal because he doesn't use his peripheral, or he doesn't look up, or he goes straight into a defender, or he puts the ball into the box with a lot of whip and power, but there's always people at that near post defending it. And you think, why is there not more purchase on the ball, or why is there not more deftness to the delivery? And all of that, I think, will come. So I can understand why Manchester United think, hang on a minute, if we sell this guy to Chelsea, then they might reap the rewards of all of our development, and we'll look back and we'll regret that decision. But ultimately, at the right number, pure profit may trump that, and that's why we can't discount a Garnacho exit.
And I think inevitably, regardless of what side of the fence a supporter sits on regarding Hojlund or Garnacho, the attack needs significant investment this summer. And we appear to be edging closer to a fantastic deal for Matheus Cunha. Now, unless you've been under a rock, you will be aware of how special he is, and his value to a poor Wolves side cannot be understated. At a time when the struggles in Manchester, particularly in the final third, are very real, suggestions regarding several high-profile players are swatted aside because of a potential lack of European football. Cunha is a player who has seemingly bought into the vision of this Ineos rebuild and the ideals of one of European football's most talented coaches in Amorim. There are multiple interpretations of what stage United are at with this package, but as somebody who has been invested in the potential move from the offset, Ben, what can you tell us about Cunha to United today?
Yeah, the situation is that Manchester United, as I revealed probably 5 weeks ago now, have seen Cunha as one of their top targets alongside Liam Delap. They view him as a number 10, and those on the Cunha side have held direct meetings with Manchester United already, but around the football project. And Cunha is sold on that and the long-term development. And as a consequence, he won't only factor in who has what next season. In other words, if Manchester United don't win the Europa League and get Champions League football, it won't necessarily influence Cunha's decision-making. Now, Newcastle have also held some talks. I think Arsenal are divided, and Andrea Berta obviously knows Cunha well. He signed him to Atletico Madrid and facilitated the sale as well. And at this stage, Arsenal haven't formally entered the race. So Newcastle and Manchester United are the two kind of front runners. And then you have Forest and Villa to an extent who have Cunha on their radar. But it's going to be difficult for Forest because I think Cunha wants to go either to a Big Six club or some project like Newcastle where they can pay bigger money than Forest. And in addition to that, likely have Champions League football and definitely have European football. So there's maybe a bit more long-term security at Newcastle. But Manchester United are leading the race, make no mistake about it. And this could move very quickly. At the time we're recording, there was a meeting in the last 48 hours, again between Cunha and Manchester United. But as we are live now, it could change this week. There's been no formal offer of terms yet. And the good news is that the wage bill Manchester United have significantly higher than Wolves. So you would imagine Manchester United will be able to make a relatively competitive offer, but we shouldn't take those terms for granted. And then from there, there's still been no outreach to Wolves either yet. And you could say that's the easy part, because I think most think that the 62.5 million release clause is market value, but maybe Manchester United hope there's some flexibility there to get more preferable payment terms. So this could move relatively fast. I'm told that Manchester United are not waiting for outgoings to do this deal, and the same if they're successful for Liam Delap. So the best part of 100 million can be spent now, because they're obviously confident of getting something for Sancho, of getting that 40 million from Villa for Rashford or elsewhere. And because it's a long summer, they will be more inclined, I'm told, to try and get Cunha done early. The same if they're successful for Liam Delap, and then worry about balancing the books throughout the summer, rather than waiting for Anthony's future, for if Casemiro's going to leave, for Rashford, etc., and then find that somebody else beats them to the punch because they're able to trigger a clause a little bit earlier. So if Manchester United move, the hard part is basically agreeing those terms with Cunha and Delap. And the easy part is triggering both clauses, 62.5 million and 30 million, or at least matching them and then getting more preferable payment terms. So Cunha to Manchester United, very realistic possibility that one gets done. Key meetings ahead. And when it becomes a little bit more advanced, because these meetings, my understanding is, are taking place via Zoom, the agent of Cunha will likely fly to England, and that will be the first clue that a deal is getting very, very close. And at that point, if terms are agreed with Cunha and Manchester United, then there'll be the formal outreach to Wolves, which hasn't happened yet. So people are naturally assuming that he's going to Manchester United, and absolutely Manchester United are firmly leading the race. But there are those important steps. Another meeting at some point this week to try and verbally agree terms. And then, of course, that formal outreach to Wolves. And those two steps haven't yet happened.
You know, you've just mentioned there regarding Cunha and Delap that one of the harder parts, or the hardest part, is personal terms and agreement on such. However, there appears to be a significant differential regarding the interests of both players, with Delap presumably holding on for as long as possible to determine the European standing of all of his potential suitors. We know that Chelsea are one of many interested parties. And given that his fee has dropped to a meagre £30 million in this footballing market following Ipswich's relegation, it's hard to see many clubs not fancying a tilt at a player who has not only hit the ground running in England's top tier, but has so much potential for growth. At United, we know that Jason Wilcox is a huge admirer given their past at City. And although Amorim favoured a deal for the likes of Osimhen, the finances, as you said, are ready and waiting to solidify a package for both of those players, regardless of any outgoings in the summer. There's a lot of ifs and buts regarding United's season, and the magnitude of Europa League glory cannot be understated given the inevitable passage that it's going to provide to the Champions League if successful. But given what you know about Cunha and what you've supplied, how do you feel about Liam Delap and the potential of him selecting Manchester United?
Yeah, I think Delap's a bit different, because with Cunha, as I said before, he's not necessarily thinking next season who's got what. He's more inclined to pick a project in the long term that he backs. And therefore, Manchester United feel confident that Cunha wants to join Manchester United. So now it's just about those formal steps of, do the terms match the project? And are Wolves willing to play ball with the flexibility around the clause? And obviously, depending on how tight Manchester United's position is, PSR-wise, we'll have to understand what they can and can't do in terms of paying the clause in full and trying to get Delap, or having to go for one or the other if they have the opportunity where they're presented with both. And, you know, these are specific financial considerations that the club will have to assess step by step. In theory, sources indicate they can do both, they want to do both, and they don't need outgoings. But obviously, if Wolves turn around and say the clause has to be paid in full in a lump sum, and release clauses sometimes operate that way, then it still could impact other business potentially. So there are some moving parts here, is what I'm saying. But ultimately, the Cunha deal will likely hinge upon agreeing terms with the player and then going to Wolves last in order to say the player wants us. So then you've got a bit more leverage. And then you find out whether Wolves are willing to be flexible. So the order there is pitch the project, it's been done, Cunha's in. Pitch the finances and agree terms, that's the ongoing step, then go to Wolves. With Liam Delap, it's a little bit different because there's no real negotiation. 30 million relegation release clause is seen as exceptional value. I don't see Ipswich being flexible. You pay the relegation release clause, otherwise there's no deal to be had. And I think everyone realises that Ipswich are not really part of the story, therefore, because all the suitors involved feel like that number's exceptional given Delap's potential in the seasons he's had. And then talking to Delap also can't be done in the same manner as Cunha yet, because even though Ipswich are down, Delap is a bit more inclined to wait and see who's got what heading into next season. And he knows that Chelsea are interested. They might have Champions League. He knows Newcastle are looking. They might have Champions League. He knows Manchester United are interested. They might have Champions League. And even though Delap, being so young, will naturally factor in the long term, I am told that next season he wants to play some form of European football. And that's probably with his, I would say, international chances in mind too. Like a lot of people ask me, well, why would a player so young say, I don't want to join Man United because they don't have any European football if they don't win the Europa League? And then if we do win the Europa League and have Champions League, if we don't get it the following season, isn't he just going to leave? Well, footballers don't really think that way. They want to have their cake and eat it. They want a long-term project and they want European football in the short term. But for Delap, it's more important because he's part of the under-21 setup. And he's probably thinking next season, European football is particularly important because it's more games at a higher level. And it's a chance, if he gets Champions League, to show Thomas Tuchel what he can do in the build-up to the 2026 World Cup. Whereas without that, maybe it impacts his international chances and then you wait 4 more years for a World Cup. So this is why I think international football is going to be linked to domestic football for Delap, and why Champions League football or some form of European football is going to be seen as important next season. And that's why it's a bit harder for Manchester United to make their pitch now, because Delap wants to wait a week or two until it's apparent who's got what ahead of next season. And then from there, because he's off to the England under-21 Euros this summer, he'll make his decision late May very quickly to try and get clarity where he's going towards the end of the season or at the end of the season. So I'm not saying that it will definitively be the very last game of the season. And obviously, if Manchester United get to the Europa League final, that's also late May. So it might be we have to be patient on this one. But obviously, if he, for example, says, I quite like Chelsea or Newcastle, he may know that they're in the Champions League by early May, potentially, depending on how the maths pans out. So I'm aware that's quite a complicated answer, but I think people just have to understand and not forget that for Delap to be in the mix for Tuchel in this World Cup, European football next season may be seen by the player as very important.
No, it's a comprehensive answer and it's very thorough, and I think people will appreciate that. Inevitably, so much of it is going to depend on the club's potential 3-game run in Europe, with the obvious benefits of victory outweighing so much of the negatives throughout the most traumatic of seasons. And that's not only for players in the squad, it's for players considering coming too, as you just stated. In Bilbao, Amram is going to be tackling a truly difficult challenge with the side placed 4th in La Liga, with only 5 defeats during an impressive season themselves domestically. A 2-0 aggregate victory against Rangers led the Basque side into the semi-final, having just about seen off Roma in the previous round. Now, much has been made about the difficulties that this side will present, but they're far from perfect, and they will allow opportunities for an unbeaten Manchester United side in Europe. Remember, they've endured losses against Roma and Besiktas since the turn of the year, as well as Copa del Rey defeat to Osasuna. And furthermore, despite their obvious talents, this is not a free-scoring outfit. They've managed 8 goals in their previous 8 games. So I'll ask one more time as a neutral, Ben, how do you see United faring in this semi-final tie?
Yeah, I mean, historically, they haven't had a great record against Spanish sides, but, you know, new manager, new system, new buzz, momentum from that ridiculous bonkers Lyon win. So in that respect, I think that Manchester United will go in with a lot of confidence. The sort of form of Athletic has been very strong at home. They don't let in many goals, but you're right, they don't score that many either, but they kept a clean sheet against Las Palmas. They kept a clean sheet against Rangers. In fact, in both legs, they drew recently away at Villarreal and again kept a clean sheet. I can't think of that many away days where they've really shipped a ton of goals. And as a consequence, I think I would be very wary of this one being won or lost or decided in the first leg. And I think that will give Manchester United a little bit of an advantage in many ways, because they'll be able to be back at Old Trafford, hopefully with a chance of getting the job done in the second leg. I think Nico Williams being fit is a big boost for Athletic Club. But the priority for Manchester United really is just to make sure they get back to Old Trafford with a chance to get through to the final. And I think the fact that the second leg comes second at Old Trafford rather than the other way around will be a big advantage.
Absolutely it will. Will United get the job done?
Yeah, I think they will. I think they'll draw away and then I think they'll win at home.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. That's pretty comprehensive. It's something I would go with myself. And Ben, a pleasure as always to spend some time with you today. It's always great to chat. And to each and every one of you listening, thank you so much for your continued support. Each listen, review and subscription is helping the podcast to grow weekly. If you wouldn't mind hitting subscribe if you haven't already done so, and you could take 2 ticks to leave a 5-star review, it would be much appreciated. And also, having looked into this lately, it appears I have been focusing all of my chat about Spotify, when it turns out we also have a huge amount of listeners on Apple. So for those on iOS, if you wouldn't mind leaving 5 stars and a few words, it would be fantastic. You can get in touch with us across every social platform at theatre_of_red for daily updates and some down-to-earth chat. Enjoy Spain. I hope you have some nails left afterwards. Up the Reds.